Hey, everybody, welcome back to this beautiful opportunity to be in this Zoom room with another stranger. This all came about because I had written this book over my left shoulder called The Mosaic. And The Mosaic is I thought it was just a charming story, but boy, I had no idea what was behind it. It has completely uprooted my life and uprooted my belief systems and uprooted everything that I knew, because one of the founding principles in the story that I wrote, without me even writing it, I thought it was just a charming story about connection, is that nothing is as it seems. Nothing is as it seems. And just sit with that for a minute and imagine that reality. Because especially in the world we live in today, so many people think they know exactly what's going on, or their belief system is exactly the right belief system. And we fight with our brothers and fathers and mothers and friends over, right now the latest menu of the day is our political forum, where people are either for Trump or against Trump, and we fight with each other, and we forget that none of that is what it seems. All of it is just an opportunity and another dimension for us to see how much we can love. Can we really love people who think differently than us? Or do we live in or have our silos of like-mindedness become so strong, and the gaps between our silos of like-mindedness so wide, that we can no longer find any area to talk with people about or be with people about? And even though the mosaic is not about this, what I love is the image of a mosaic. And that in a mosaic, sometimes the pieces are only connected by the very tip of a corner to another corner, meaning that just about everything that one piece thinks and feels and believes doesn't agree with what everything else that this piece believes. But they find that one area of connection, that one area where they do have something in common, and they connect there, and the mosaic is made more beautiful because of it, because there's no gap between it. And I wonder what life would look like if we were to live in a world where we would look for that similarity rather than highlight the differences and spend all our time on differences. The mosaic's a story about a boy who loses his father and mother 2 years apart on the same day. And when he asks the adults where his parents are, they tell him they're in a place called heaven. So he sets out immediately in search of the place called heaven. But the people he meets along the way aren't the people he thought he would meet. And when he looks at them, he wonders, these aren't people that can teach me anything. These aren't people that can show me heaven. They're a street worker and a blind woman, a homeless man, and a juice maker, a gardener, and a waitress. And he thinks these are just common, ordinary people. What are they going to show me? But he hears a voice within him say, you're here with them. Why don't you just sit and listen to what they have to say? And when he does, he realizes in 100% of the cases that who he thought they were isn't at all who they are. He wasn't trying to change them. He wasn't trying to fix them. He wasn't trying to help them. All he did was listen to them. And what he's found is they changed him, because he realized his impression, his perception completely shifted. And a little bit of a spoiler, but it won't ruin the book for you, is he realizes that the heaven he's looking for is that momentary shift of perception, when everything he thought was becomes something else. What would happen if nothing is as it seems? What would happen if you were to allow yourself to shift your perspective just a little bit? If you were to think that what you think is just that, it's what you think, but it isn't what is. What would the world look like if you slid yourself to the left and could see the world the way it is? My sponsor would be very happy, which is the mosaic right here, if you would go to Amazon and pick up a copy. I would be very happy to hear how you experience it. It's a simple little story, innocent, that you could read in a few hours. But I'll tell you something, it's changed my entire life and it's uprooted everything that I thought I believed in. I would welcome you to come on that adventure with me. If you do get it, please let me know. I'd love to hear your impressions. Okay, a lot of talk about something that we had to do just to fulfill our obligations, and something I wanted to do because I want people to have it. But I have this beautiful opportunity to sit with Josh Gryniewicz.
Right on.
And,
Yeah.
and Josh, I know I'm saying it in the American butchered version. Tell us your name the way you would say it.
Oh, well, I would say it. I would say it Gryniewicz. I butcher it left and
Okay.
right,
Okay.
but apparently the correct pronunciation is Gryniewicz.
Gryniewicz. Oh, I love
Yeah.
it. Okay. And where's that name from?
Poland.
Poland. Fabulous. Well, welcome to the conversation. What an honor to have you here. Tell us a little bit of who you are, because we don't. I know you through somebody that I met in this room,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then he had me on his podcast too, and so he suggested we get together. But I know nothing about you, so please share with me and the listeners who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. Thank you, Danny, for that.
My honor.
Yeah, that was great. And I am super excited to be checking out the Mosaic as well.
Thank you.
So I am first and foremost, I consider myself a storyteller as well, which it seems like you
Love
are
that.
as well.
Yeah.
I do storytelling for social change. So working with a lot of nonprofit organizations and startups, and trying to tease out the story of an organization or of basically how an issue is approached. So my background, I was raised on the south side of Chicago. Both of my parents are artists. They're both folklorists as well. Mom is a painter and crafts person, and she got really into folk dance. She's a little, they basically kind of aged out of the folk dance, but they still do a lot of the crafts and stuff like that. And dad he was a poet and an artist, illustrator, and is now and a storyteller. And now he writes books and children's books as well. And so I went through, I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Big Fish.
Yes. Yes.
Burton. Okay. So it's a Tim Burton film, and in the film, the dad is Albert Finney, is a salesperson, but he's also like a storyteller, kind of like this carnival-esque guy. That's my dad. and Billy Crudup is his son, and his son becomes a reporter, but he's very just the facts. And so, at the end, they kind of realize that they share this bond of storytelling. So that was sort of like, in a nutshell, my childhood. So my dad, every family trip was to go and look for Bigfoot, or to this is before the internet, right? So it wasn't as easy to hunt for Bigfoot in those days. And we'd planned family trips around sea monsters and stuff like that. And so by the time that I was old enough, I was just like, I'm done with this. I'm interested more in kind of the Jungian lens and looking at stories and how stories come to be, rather than trying to live in one.
Wow.
And so that created a little tension at home. But I went into psychology. And so I went through psychology and kind of I actually became a counselor. A crisis counselor, primarily working with runaway and homeless youth. But it was sort of a catch-all program because, kids end up on the street for any number of reasons. I did that for about 6.5 years, working in the runaway and homeless youth space. And then I just sort of burnt out. So I was taking all of that, and taking all of, basically receiving all of sort of that emotional space, and the way I frame it is, it's sort of like I was seeing more of the failures than I was successes, and I just couldn't handle it. So I crossed over to the external relations side of things, so across the aisle, sort of the administrative external relations, and I did the fundraising and the communications piece. And basically that was my trajectory, was sort of this, nonprofit communications or public interest communications. And I had an opportunity then to work with a violence prevention organization, for a former infectious disease specialist at the World Health Organization, and he was a data guy through and through. And so he saw me the same way I saw my father in a lot of ways, as like the story guy who is like, always trying to get him to frame things in stories and tell the story and what's our story. And he'd be like, people only read the New York Times, Josh, for the graphs. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of, so I Danny, I became kind of obsessed with wanting to convince him, and I started researching. This is about 12 years ago now. So I started researching like the science behind storytelling, and I looked at, there's been success, evaluated success in changing public health norms around HIV/AIDS and domestic violence through soap operas. So I looked at that. I looked at comic books in Kenya that were used for violence prevention, also for creating kind of new behavioral kind of patterns around subsistence and kind of changing crops and stuff like that, and nutrition. I looked at, so I was looking for, data and trying to approach him in data. We would go, and I'm condensing what was essentially like a 5-year debate
Wow. Wow.
into a shorthand. But it was influential enough. I hope I had as much of an influence on him as he had on me, but it was influential enough that I ended up going back to grad school for creative writing and thinking there's something here. There's something in this space between creativity and writing in particular, and storytelling, and social change and public health, norm change work. And so, I basically went back to grad school for creative writing and storytelling, and came out. And then about 2 years ago, I essentially had the opportunity to kind of fuse these two things together. And I started seeing more and more that, storytelling was becoming kind of this way to what I had seen already kind of like, 10 years earlier, was becoming something that was being more adopted by foundations and organizations. And I thought, this is the time, this is kind of the moment. And so I threw myself out there. And so that's what I'm doing today, working with mental health and public health and scientists, and helping them share and shape their story.
Wow. Beautiful, beautiful encapsulation. And thank you for sharing all that. When you were bringing together the science of storytelling, what did you actually find in the data?
So a lot of storytelling is effective for, sort of what you do and what your room is all about, right? So it's empathy and generating empathy, stepping into someone else's shoes and experiencing their experience. So that's a big part of it. Transmitting emotion, transmitting memories, and collective memories. So if we think of narrative with a capital N as sort of like our public narrative, then all of that public narrative is shaped by, narrative with a lowercase n. And so transmitting all of those little kind of behavioral and memory components that shape up that capital N narrative. Conveying, there is no universal truth. I mean, I don't think you'll debate me on that, but certainly conveying and transmitting cultural truths and norms and helping to kind of influence that.
So let me jump in.
Sure,
So
please.
In a world where you and I both perhaps agree that there is no universal truth.
Sure.
When you look at the world outside, the story of the world seems to tell us, or the story the people in the world seem to want to tell us, is there is a universal truth, and that they have it. How have you found the ability of storytelling to allow people to understand that what the story they're telling is just that, the story they're telling, versus the reality that is?
I think that would be more storytelling in sort of the space that you set up versus the approach that I usually take of like telling a story. So one of the
Gotcha.
things that we've learned right about conspiracy theory, okay, is that the best way to address conspiracy theory is not by trying to argue fact for fact or by saying no, you're absolutely wrong, we know da 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 da. The best way to approach conspiracy theory is to open the space for, well, why do you think that? Why do you
Right.
believe that? Well, how have you experienced that? Well, have you ever considered this?
Right.
And so when I talk about storytelling, I actually include a lot of what you do and as storytelling as well, right? And so it's creating that space to listen, to address, to kind of have that back and forth dialogue and to actually understand somebody and where they're coming from. And I think that's how you kind of unpack that truth.
What's most surprised you about the work that you do?
Um, well, this year has sort of you know really been like a test. So to kind of give like a full timeline. Too when I was getting into this, there was sort of like a, so this is probably 2018 is when I decided to kind of launch myself, and so the stars were sort of aligning in that space in the sense that I had found my dream job, Danny. I had found my dream job online as a narrative strategist. I didn't even know that was a thing, and I'm
Wow.
like, I'm gonna go for that. I'm doing narrative strategy. So I had put together like I went all in. I put together my updated my resume, and I wrote the perfect cover letter, and I put together a PowerPoint, and I sent the PowerPoint, and I was like, okay, we're on this, um, and the PowerPoint was all about where I saw the field of storytelling and of narrative going for organizations and for nonprofits. And it was I was sort of thinking, well, if I could, I'll really woo this potential employer if they see like how much thought I give to this and how much how deep this goes for me. And I didn't get the job,
Oh,
but three of the five things that I had said were sort of like on the horizon for the future of storytelling and for organizational storytelling were things that the organization that I was trying to get into adopted as part of their policies.
wow.
Um, I'm not taking any credit for that. I'm just my thought is that I was seeing something there
Yeah.
that to me was very vindicating. And
Yep.
so I was like, okay, I'm onto something, and also like I had said earlier, I was seeing more and more that organizations were more readily embraced. When I was first kind of adopting this as like a direction, I would have to have the same argument that I had had with the doc who I had mentioned earlier, and I was having that same argument with public health professionals and doctors and scientists and having to debate it. I haven't had to have that debate in a long time.
Wow.
you
Yeah.
know and it's because the world has sort of shifted with that and sort of gotten to a
Yeah.
place where we're more readily embracing it. um Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I, as you're speaking, sort of what I'm hearing, and tell me if this is at all true or not, because it's just what I'm hearing. Um, it almost feels like the conversation you were having with your dad has happened over and over again, but you switched sides several times.
Yeah, correct. Yes. Yeah. That's what I was going to say is, but I keep ending up on different sides. And I'll even say, can I swear on your show?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I had this serious oh shit moment at the beginning of like all of this, not just because like, oh shit, global pandemic, which is good enough
Right.
reason to oh
Right.
shit. But also like, I was like, well, what place does storytelling have in like, is storytelling just like, like when we're contending with everything that we're contending with a culture. So, the storytelling component and, all of the activism that we've seen and sort of the uprisings and everything else, I was having this moment of like, you know, was I sort of, you know, was I being my dad? Was I being like, you know, sort of like, you know, cotton candy, unicorns, and stories, like everything's woo, you know, and this is the reality check. And then like I started seeing, you know, that very quickly in that short span of time, you know, after the pandemic had sort of reached, you know, the U.S. It sort of took off in Seattle or in the Seattle area and then spread, right? And so I was seeing that, and I was seeing like all of a sudden, you know, that like now this was a real test to sort of my core true north philosophy, right? And then I was realizing all of these places where of things that I'd already believed were actually like, you know, coming to fruition when it mattered most. So you had, you know, you had in Europe, you had Camus' The Plague, right? Flying off of shelves as if it was a vaccine, right? Because people were so hungry for some sort of story, for some sort of like narrative or guidepost or something to show like, you know, how to get through this. And so you had this like, you know, explosion in pandemic lit because people were looking for some sort of guidepost. You also had, you know, one of the things that I'm most proud of this past year for me personally was I worked with a public health organization it's actually several organizations that work collectively in different public health spaces. And we collected all of these stories from all of these different public health areas. And I can send you a link if you wanted to share.
Yeah, love it. It's
free, it's downloadable. Please. But it was, you know, we actually covered, we worked with a public health organization in Minneapolis who was working on public safety, alternatives to public safety around the time of, you know, the George Floyd murder.
Wow.
We worked with public health organizations that were working in Navajo Nation. And so, you know, how they were able to address some of the outbreak there. We worked with the public health department who actually documented the first case and how they were able to sort it out. So we collected all of this and all of that story, you know, and so and it's like this test, and it's like that's not what I had signed on for, but oh my God, it's a test.
Totally.
I'm passing.
So let me jump in here and try and change perspective a little, because like I'm so interested, and I could listen to you for hours because what you're talking about completely interests me as a person.
Yeah.
But the nature of this show is a little bit different.
Yeah.
It's less about what we do and more about what we are. And one person, I was on his podcast, and I told him that I wanted to create this revolution of listening and how important that was for me, because I felt like people speak so much but don't listen very much.
Yeah.
And that if we listened more, we would end a lot of the problems that we have. And he asked me a very astute question, and he wasn't the sharpest interviewer that I've been with, but this question was probably one of the best questions I asked. And he said, why do you have such a desire to help people listen? Did you not feel listened to when you were a kid? Mm-hmm. And the answer was that I did feel listened to. My parents just passed away too soon, so I felt that I lost them too soon, and I didn't get to share with them enough of my life that I wanted to share with them. I'm going to ask you the same question. Why is story so important to you? Do you feel like your story has been told? Do you feel like you've been able to share your story? Do you feel like who you are through story is present? Or do you feel like that's still a story that needs to be shared?
Yeah. Wow, that's I mean, I feel so similarly. I feel that, you know, I was indulged quite a bit, so I got to tell lots of stories. And you know, my uncle still talks about how he would try to trip me up when I was telling these elaborate stories of like, yeah, but the dog Fido, and I was like, the dog's name wasn't Fido. Like, so I definitely had a very indulgent family in that sense. And so I will say, I guess I would answer in two ways. One is, that saying storytelling, kind of like what our common ground, right? So when I talk about storytelling, I also talk or include a listening component to that,
Yeah.
and talk about stories that are underrepresented or
But I
unheard.
want to I want to interrupt you because
Yeah,
I want to keep pulling you back
yeah,
to
yeah,
the
yeah,
place
yeah,
that I
yeah.
want you
Feel
not to
that.
run away from if I can.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
And that place is um, stories are so powerful.
yeah.
But what I've seen, at least in my life, is I've made up stories that just simply weren't true.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Mm-hmm.
believed that they were true.
Mm-hmm.
And I've punished myself for the truth of those stories, even though they weren't true.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
I wonder, I'm not asking if you've had the ability to tell stories.
yeah, yeah.
I want to know if you've had the ability to tell your honest, true, heartfelt, secret story.
Mm.
Not if you've covered it up with other stories about the dog whose name wasn't really Fido.
Mm. I see. I see. So for me personally, I do think I do. So here's a thing. I'm going to answer your question, and this is,
Okay.
but what I would say. So I'm ADD, right? Unless I and like diagnosed, like full on, like
Okay.
I was actually diagnosed with attention deficit and the most extreme hyperactivity
Right.
that the doc had ever seen. And I was like, is that a new diagnosis or is that? So one of the things that happens with ADD and with ADDers is that when you communicate, you try to speak and share several ideas at once. It's like there's no control valve. So I mean, sometimes the character of that, right, is somebody who kind of like just speaks exactly as they're observing. But it also happens where it's like, you tend to start a conversation right in the middle, or,
Yeah.
because it's like, why isn't anybody catching up with me? But it's not even, so it's like, the way I frame it with my wife all the time, who catches me on this, is like, I'm trying to say or put together three ideas at once, not like connect them or like you with Mosaic and find that
Right.
connection point. I'm literally trying to say or do something that's absolutely impossible, which is articulate three ideas simultaneously,
Yeah.
because I haven't built
Are you
the
successful at it?
no, no, no. I don't think it's possible to be successful at it. Maybe they'll develop an AI app that will figure out how to do it, but I don't think it's humanly possible to do that. So I am often in the position, and throughout my lifetime, and this goes to your point and the very focused question you asked, I have often been misunderstood,
Yeah.
or if I'm not careful, and not doing the things that I need to do, to manage the ADD, even in a conversation. Like I had to limit my caffeine intake today because I knew if I came on over caffeinated, Danny, you would be like, this guy was all over the place. He was popping all up, because that's just the way. And so, you know, for me, narrative is a way to kind of collect and tell and shape, the things that I actually want to get across. And
So
yeah,
let me jump in if I can.
yeah.
One of the things the Mosaic told me through my conversation with it and my listening to it was that nothing is as it seems. And I don't mean to say anything to go against medical expertise here. I don't mean to say that what they're telling you is or isn't true. But that story becomes a very concrete story. That story of I have this and this is the way I am becomes a very concrete story. And what I've seen in the experience of my life, take it or leave it, it doesn't mean my experience is right. Okay? Is that that truth is entirely true until another perception comes in and changes that perception. I'm thinking of the thing that I'm sure you've seen, the line drawing that shows black and white of an old hag and a young socialite,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
when we look at it as and when I looked at it the first time I saw it was an old hag. And my friend said to me, well, do you see it any other way? And I said, what are you talking about? I mean, they said, well, do you see a young, beautiful woman there? I said, come on. All right. I'm all about being politically correct and socially correct, but this is an old hag. There's nothing really that beautiful about her. And they said, no, but you're not seeing it clearly.
Yeah.
And I said, you can't tell me that this picture is not what I see. But the person persisted. And he just said, I want you to try and stand up and sit down and walk around and move around and see if you can see it differently than the way you're seeing it.
Yeah, yeah,
I believe that picture, and I saw the young socialite. And at that moment, I could no longer see the old hag because what we see literally blocks us from seeing every other reality that's there. I'm not giving you a medical prognosis. I'm just giving you an idea.
yeah,
What would happen if you took that prognosis and you just slid it to the right? And you said, I know that's what I've been told I am. But what would I see if I no longer felt for this moment that that's the diagnosis that I had?
mm.
Who would I be? What would life look like? How would that appear? What would I no longer have to do to convince myself that that reality is the reality?
Yeah,
Because what I've seen is told a story told over and over and over and over and over again starts to become a reality in our mind, but it's not a reality, it's just a story.
mm.
And the beauty of a story is that it is a story. It isn't real. It's a story because as soon as I tell you my story, the story you hear is different than the one that I'm telling you. It's just natural
Yeah,
human
absolutely,
instinct, right?
absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
And so, like, what if the concreteness of the belief systems we have were different and the power of story was that another story could completely change the perspective of that story, and another story could completely change that perspective and completely
yeah,
change that perspective, and there was no reality of a story that is just a story.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, absolutely, yeah. And I believe that. I believe that. That's the why I was cutting against sort of universal truth with a capital T, right? Like it's
Yeah.
all of our stories. That's storytelling. It's all of our stories.
Yeah.
You know?
So do me a favor, if you feel to. You can
Yeah.
pass on this. I told you you don't have to answer any question
Yeah,
I ask.
yeah. You keep making me nervous, but I like it. Yeah.
Okay. Why do I make you nervous?
You're pushing me. You're pushing me. I like it.
Okay. All right. Imagine the story of you being ADD is no longer on the table.
Mm,
Imagine that story has been told. It's part of another chapter of your life.
sure.
Imagine looking at yourself afresh. In the Mosaic, there's a character called the Mirror Maker.
Mm,
And Mo's been walking on desolate, on country roads where he hasn't seen anybody for many, many, many days, maybe weeks, maybe even a month. And he gets to the bottom of a hill and he sees on the top of the next hill out in front of him lights of a village, and he gets really excited because he's ready to see people. And he thinks, if I go quickly, I can see them tonight before they leave. And so he starts to run, and he runs up this hill. And by the time he gets there, most of the village is closed. But there's one store that's open. And the door's open, so he thinks it's okay to walk in, and he walks in. But nobody's in the store. But it's a store full of mirrors. So he doesn't even know if what he's looking at is what he's looking at, or if it's a reflection of a reflection of a reflection. So he thinks, in order to see anything in this store, I have to come right up to it close. And he walks from mirror to mirror to mirror to see them, and he stops transfixed in front of one mirror that's absolutely exquisite. It's not made of glass, or it's made of bronze, and the bronze is so polished and so beautifully smooth that he sees a reflection of it. And the mirror maker must have known this mirror was special because she's put a light on it that shone on it that made the reflection even come out even more. And he's sitting there looking at this mirror, and all of a sudden behind him, the mirror maker comes behind him and she says to him, I see you found something you liked. What does the mirror see in you? And Mo starts to tell him the story of what he sees in the mirror and all the things, all his stories, all the travels, that he's no longer a young boy. He's becoming an older man. He's been out for so long and he's a little lonely. And she lets him speak for a little while and she says, I'm sorry. I understand that's what you see when you look in the mirror. That wasn't my question. My question is, what does the mirror see when it looks at you? It doesn't know any of your stories. It doesn't know any of your thoughts or your beliefs. It just sees you. What does it see? And Mo looks at her and says, I don't know what it sees. I've been so attached to my stories that I can't see myself without my stories. She said, there's no rush. Sit here for a while and see what it shows you. I would love to invite you to look into that mirror. And if you can, I would love you to tell me the story of what the mirror sees in you now.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
That was great. What does the mirror see?
To take pressure off of you, I wrote that book 3 years ago. I still don't know what the mirror sees in me when it looks at me. So you don't have to answer right now.
All right, yeah,
okay.
Good, yeah, that's good.
but I do spend most of my days now, inviting myself to see what the mirror might see when it looks at me, rather than what I would see when I look in the mirror.
Yeah.
And what would that story be?
I dig that. I like that. I thought we were going to turn this into like a mini series.
We can.
Back, and most of it would be Josh just going.
So let me ask you something. What scares you most about what you do?
What scares me most about what I do? I mean, I think one of the things that I'll say is that I feel like when people trust me with their story, that's an awesome responsibility. I look at that the same way that I looked at like counseling, and because I was being trusted with people's lives sometimes. And so I feel like when people invest their story and share their story with me, so there's always a risk of getting it wrong. And so that would be one thing that scares me, and that I work very hard to make sure that it's not just checking those boxes for why it's a compelling story, but that it's actually doing right by the person who's sharing it with me, or people who are sharing it with me.
The same question keeps coming up and I can't shake it, so I'm just going to ask it again.
Yeah, right on.
Is that okay?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
It feels to me that there's a story that you have sidetracked in the telling of everybody else's story. It's a way that you can get around telling the story of yourself to the world. If you could tell the story of yourself right now to the world, what would you say?
Wow. Well, so the first thing that I'll say, Danny, is I've been in therapy now for about 6 years, and we keep coming back to that same question.
Okay. All right. Way. So it's real.
So yeah. So it's real. So I don't know that we'll wrap that up with the time that we have. But I definitely, I do think that you're onto something, and I think that's part of, there is to your earlier point, and I think this is part of, there's an intoxication to story, right? but there's a certain kind of intoxication. There's a certain way that story can be um, a veneer, or like the mirrors, like it's a way that it can kind of distort what we actually see, especially with ourselves.
Yeah.
um, and and there's definitely been times in my life where it's been very easy to fall into that.
Have you ever known your story? Have you ever known it, spoke it, listened to it, and fallen in love with it?
I don't know that. I mean, I don't know that I have, and I also feel like there's certain stories that I'm still working the up the courage and the yeah, I guess mostly the courage to actually be able to tell at some point my own
So,
stories.
on a completely different note,
Yeah,
this is not what this is about,
yeah.
but I would be intoxicated with helping you tell your story,
Oh,
because I believe there's a really powerful story in there.
yeah,
And as I listen to you, what I hear is less the words of your mouth and more the words of your heart and soul that say, this story needs to come out. And that sometimes I know for myself, for everybody, like in writing my book, I thought it would take me 60 or 90 days to do it, because I'm a storyteller, and it's a
yeah,
story basically of my life. It wasn't that hard. And I had written a story for a hotel that had no story and had no idea of what the story was. And it took me 60 days to do that.
yeah,
So, and it became it became their brand, and it became the way they hired people and fired people, and it became the way they treated their guests and did all sorts of things. And the book appeared on the pillows in the evenings when people came to bed,
yeah, yeah,
and so I did that in 60 days. So I thought, gosh, this will take my story is going to be a little harder
yeah,
because
yeah.
I'm
Why
more
not?
personal to it.
Yeah,
It'll
yeah,
take me 90 days, but probably
yeah.
not more than that. 3 years later, I still hadn't gotten the story.
Yeah,
And the
yeah,
characters in the story stood up to me and said to me, what you're saying for us to say is not what we want to say, and we can't let you write that for us. And I said, I'm sorry, with all due respect, you're my characters. I made you up, right? I
yeah,
should be able
yeah,
to say what I want to say through you.
yeah,
And they said, no, that's not true. As soon as you brought us to reality, we have a reality.
yeah,
And the reality of who we are doesn't mesh with the story you're trying to tell of us. So until you listen to what we're trying to say to you, we can't let you write this story. And I said, okay, what if I listen? They said, 30 days, your book will be done. Otherwise, 5 years later, you'll still be in the same place. So I said, I'll do it. And the voice that I have become now as a result of that book
yeah, yeah,
is a different voice than the voice that I was before that. Their story and the things that they told me, they wanted to say were meant for me. And surely other people got benefit from it. But I was writing a story for others. They were saying, this is what we want you to hear. And in sharing what we want you to hear, the world will hear what we want it to hear as well. But don't separate yourself out from that story.
yeah.
And so, excuse me if my insistence on having you be able to share your story, I believe it's connected. Everything is connected to the stories that you're trying to say. And the story of what you tell of another place, business, person, corporation, will change when your story is
Yeah,
more complete.
I feel that.
You do?
Yeah, I do. I do.
Thank
Yeah.
you for affirming that, because we
Yeah.
don't know each other from Adam. So,
No, no.
or Eve, or, any of the other
Yeah,
people,
yeah.
right? But, but it's so powerful when you actually connect with a human being
Yeah,
and you cut through the stories to find the story,
yeah,
because there is a truth that, like we said before, there is no ultimate reality, but there is a reality that's ultimate, at least in this place.
yeah,
And you were brought here to tell your story, not only to tell the stories of others. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, what are you most hopeful for?
Most hopeful. That's I mean, so around I feel that optimism itself is something that's learned and that has to be practiced. Probably spent the last like 4 years actively working on it and learning it. And so, I'm not, this has been sort of a challenging year for that. But I have challenged myself to, to do that, to continue to be optimistic. So what am I most hopeful for? I think like the most radical things that we imagine are possible. you know,
Yeah.
I really do. I believe that. I believe another world is possible. That we can remake this one in a way where I'll tell you, Danny, and I think this quote is going to resonate with you. It's a paraphrase, but I reread Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt
Hmm.
Vonnegut recently.
Yeah.
Do you remember that one?
Oh God, a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah. It was the same for me. But there's a quote in there, and that quote has become like part of my core. And it's dated, so I'm going to update it. That's part of the paraphrase. But he says, the two characters are talking. And this is one of those parts in the book where Vonnegut is actually breaking through as a character. So
Hmm.
he's speaking directly to the audience, and he's talking to a buddy. And the buddy says, "Oh, look at this. There's like 8 billion people in the world." And Vonnegut says, "Yeah, and I bet they all want to be treated like human beings."
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
in that like dry, cynical
Yeah.
kind of, Vonnegut way. But, fucking A, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Totally.
and so like I read that and I was just like, yeah, like absolutely. Like, yeah, absolutely. And so when I think about it, like and I feel like that encapsulates it, right? Because it's delivered so cynically, but that is the world. That's what I'm hopeful for. I'm hopeful for
Beautiful.
a world where 8 billion people can be treated like human beings.
So if you were to really take the first step towards that, and it's what I really ask, it's the closing question that I usually ask, but we're here a little bit early, but let's go
Yeah.
there. If you were to take the first step towards making the world into a world where 8 billion people felt like they were human, what would you suggest people do, or what would you do to have that, to initiate that process?
Well, I mean, my suggestion would just be like listen and also like, check yourself, right? Like, like a lot of times I feel like we bring our own baggage into interactions and to social interaction. It's very easy to think of someone even just in a role as like, oh, you're a server, or oh, you're a barista or whatever. And my coffee it doesn't have all 3 pumps of caramel that I had wanted. Well, I don't even know why I chose that example. It's not
Right.
like, but whatever. So like I think that's, to me, that's like the twofold is one is actually creating the space like you're doing, to listen and to meet people where they're at. And the other is to just recognize the humanity in everybody. Um,
Beautiful. Why do you think people find it so hard to listen? Or do you think people find it hard to listen?
yeah, I feel like we're just all so wrapped up in our own shit. Like that's it. That's it's and I mean myself too. I'm not exempting myself from
Yeah.
it. Like
Yeah.
that's just a fact. Like, the day to day, you gotta like that's where, like a mindfulness practice or something like that comes in, or like, your the questions, like the mirror questions that you were asking yourself. Like you have to check yourself, so that you can be present in that space and meeting people where they're at.
So I love the ask the question, what if you didn't have to do that? Like, what if it were like that makes it so hard for most people.
Yeah.
You know, that makes it so like laborious. And I don't know that I really want to look at myself that deeply. I don't say that you're not right,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but sometimes we put up these, you know, mythological story walls to make it so that we'll never do that. What I found, I've been able to mix with some of the most influential people in the world, to sit at their dining room tables and meet their parents and to play on the floor with their children.
Yeah.
And I've been able to sit on street corners with some of the poorest people in the world and to meet their friends and their families as well.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how much money you have or what color your skin or what religion you practice or don't practice. What I found is everybody wants the same thing. They just want to be loved and accepted.
Yeah.
They want to be listened to and heard. And they want to be acknowledged and validated. And I don't know that I have to do all of that for myself. Some people will say to me all the time, well, you can't give something to somebody you don't have. And it makes perfect sense. And it's, you know, so easy to understand that.
Yeah.
But it just hasn't been my experience. In giving to people that space to be loved and accepted and listened to and heard and acknowledged and validated, stuff that I haven't had or I haven't given to myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm finding that it's not becoming more and more natural for me to have it for myself because of what I'm doing. For the more I become that for other people, the more I become that for myself. So this whole philosophy of you can't give something, put on your mask first and then help the person next to you. I don't know how true that is. I mean, I know it's true on one level, but I don't believe things just because people think they're true.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, it's just another beautifully mass-approved story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what if you didn't have to do all that for yourself before you could just open your ears and listen and sit and love another human being? What if you just said, hey, I really want to know how you're doing today?
Yeah.
And you just listen to them. You
Yeah.
don't really have to become a holy man to do that, right? You just have to listen to them.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
No, that, I mean, I feel like that totally resonates. That's
Yeah.
what's up. Yeah. Like I feel that the same way. And it's, you know, that's why I was saying, like, I'm definitely not exempt from creating my own stories. And
Yeah.
especially now that we're all, you know, expected to be distanced. And so, you know, like it's very hard to do that, to practice that.
But what if it weren't?
But what if it weren't? Yeah.
Like this, I didn't know you 10 minutes ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't find it at all hard to sit with you.
No.
I find it an absolute pleasure. I don't find it at all hard to listen to you and ask you questions. I find it an absolute joy.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up in a world where my mom said, don't talk to strangers. Well, she'd be turning over in her grave if she saw what I'm doing now. Because that's all I do now.
That's all you do. Yeah.
But strangers, I realized when we spend 3 minutes with a stranger, they're no longer a stranger, they're a friend.
Yeah.
Especially if we listen to them.
That's it.
We're at the end of our time. Unfortunately, could go on for a long time with you. I like you.
Yeah. Thank you.
If people wanted to get involved with the work that you're doing and have you storyboard or storytell their organization or their business or their life, how would they get in touch with you?
Sure. So it's oddduck.io is the name of my company.
Oddduck.io?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Oddduck. You've met me now, so you understand the name of
Right.
the company.
Okay. And we'll have that information along with all the social media links and all of that in the show notes for you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Josh, I want to thank you so much for being here and for sharing yourself with us.
Danny, thank you. And thank
Uh,
you for creating the space for everything that you do.
it's
It's
my
great.
honor, my
Yeah.
honor. And for those who are listening, I want to thank you for showing up. If you like the show, what do we do when we like something? It's just human nature. We tell the people we like about the things that we like. So if you like this show, share it with people you like and let them have the opportunity to like what you like. And that's how things grow also. When we tell people about what we like and they like it, and they tell people about what they like and they like it, and then things grow. It's not so much because I want the show to grow. I'm happy with where it is or not where it is. It doesn't matter. But it's good for us to start to have conversations that are meaningful. And I end every show saying the same thing. An hour ago, I had no idea who Josh was. An hour later, I feel like he's a friend, and when I'm in the area he's in, we will definitely get together and have a meal together, a coffee, a drink, or something. How easy is it to turn a stranger into a friend? And when we live in a world full of strangers, the world's a strange world. But when we live in a world full of friends, the world becomes a friendly world. The world could use to become a more friendly world. And all you have to do is reach out and take 10 minutes out of the course of your lifetime and just sit with somebody and listen to them. If you don't know where to start, just start by asking, how are you? And let them tell you. Until the next stranger comes into this room, I want to thank you all for being here. Josh, thank you again for being here.
Danny, thank you.
Folks who are listening, thank you for being here. And until next time, be kind to yourself, be kind to others. Listen to yourself, listen to others. And let's make this a friendly world by turning strangers into friends. Ciao.